I am very pleased to be here today to introduce a most important spiritual teacher and philosopher at this time. Mr. Nepo was here, Mark was here for the past 2 days, awakening and embracing and giving us ways to see life from many different views. And yes, each one of us has found a new room with a view. Mark very eloquently said these words: "The struggle between self-interest and care lives in each heart. We are asked to work those and these choices every day, and the life of relationship, family, and community depend on what we choose." A few other things that people have said about Mark. Nepo is a consummate storyteller and a rare gift for making the invisible visible. Mark Nepo's life is filled with the experience of continually being drawn to what we need to learn. He does not claim that this impetus to exclusive in the pilgrim's path, but rather he offers to us examples that we may follow to remind us to notice what grabs our attention. I first met Mark Nepo during the release of The Power of the Heart, a movie that he so eloquently narrated throughout and weaved through messages of importance. We then went on to work in the year-long journey, which was a year-long program, deepening awarenesses. Mark lives his life like a moving meditation. He draws his life from spiritual thought leaders, from the nature world, and from live historical events. A 30-year cancer survivor, he lives and breathes and allows his life force to be here with purpose. With the heart of a poet and the eye of a philosopher, the focus always is to uncover the pathway that brings us all together. His first book that is most recognized is the Book of Awakening, which brought him into the realm of Super Soul Sundays on the Oprah channel, and his new book, More Together Than Alone. He's been clearing a path of inquiry for 40 years, authored more than 20 books, and in 2014 traveled the country with the sold out The Life What You Want and Have the Life You Want tour with Oprah Winfrey. He's just returned to North America from London, England, where he appeared to have quite an awakening there as well. And people were receptive to the importance of the local and global community message. Mark is here now to share some inspiring stories to deepen our awareness of self. So please, with me, in warm, warm Vancouver Unity Community welcome, Mr. Mark Nepo.
Oh, thank you so much. Good morning. Good morning. It's great to be here, to be with you. Some of you, we've had a very touching weekend together. Thank you, Janet, so much, and Randy for that very touching meditation. and also Brian, who's up there, has been a wonderful host. So I do want to share, how you are gathering here is part of this lineage. It's part of this lineage of care and interdependence and community that has gone on throughout all of humanity. And, I was drawn to work on this book that we were just referring to because I was compelled to try to gather stories throughout history and across cultures of just moments when we've worked well together. I wasn't looking for any social theory or grand solution to anything. I simply wanted to better understand the lineage we stand on. And the lineage we've been talking this weekend, the lineage of care, is quieter than the lineage of separation, which makes a lot of noise when things fall apart. But it is true too. So when we gather like this, we're standing on a long, strong history that is alive. So I want to share just a constellation of things, touch on maybe one or two things we've touched on the last few days, but share some other things. And yes, so there are many great examples in nature about community. And one that we mentioned this weekend is of the aspen grove. And I don't know how many of you know about aspens or have had the chance to be in an aspen grove. And I was in New Mexico. And they can be hundreds of square miles. But what's most amazing about the aspen grove is that above ground they're individual trees. But underneath, they all share one root system. So an entire aspen grove is one living organism, one of the largest single living organisms on Earth. It's one entangled root system that sustains the entire grove, thousands of trees. So this is a perfect metaphor, just hidden quietly in nature, for community. Because every one of us here, we are individual trees. We are individual lives. We have our dreams, our pains, our goals, our struggles. And yet, underneath, out of view, we have one spiritual root system. And so this makes kindness more than altruistic. It makes kindness and care necessary. You've got to care about it because they're your roots. And so we have to care about each other's roots. And kindness and love are the ways that we keep the roots connected. And Randy was mentioning about this beautiful, amazing thing about blindness and sightedness. And Maimonides, who was the great Jewish rabbi, physician, philosopher during the 1100s. He was part of a great community, the Iberian Peninsula, which for 700 years was a place located in central in Spain. Cordoba, Spain was the capital. And this was a time when Muslims, Christians, and Jews not only tolerated each other, it was one of the high periods of enlightenment. And Maimonides was one of the products of that amazing civilization. And he said that growing and understanding, it's like we do it by these glimpses. It's like when you're out in a field at dark and there's sudden lightning, a burst of lightning, and you can see, and then it goes dark. And then you make your way by what you remember when you could see. And then another burst of lightning. And he said, this is how we grow. And when I can't see, I have to ask you, what did you see when the light was there? And then we could say that the history of community and the history of isolation is the pattern of human beings being blinded and sighted, again and again. But we have to stay committed to what we see when we're sighted. And love Love helps us see. Love helps us see. So as we talk about this, I want to offer two quotes. One is from Plato. We've all heard of Plato. And Plato said, we are born whole, W-H-O-L-E, but we need each other to be complete. So that we are intact, we are whole beings. We don't need anything. But it doesn't manifest because we need each other. All the traditions speak about that differently, but it's the same thing. In Christianity, it's talked about where two or more are present, then the Holy Spirit appears. In the Jewish tradition, God is known as an indwelling presence. But it's only manifest through relationship. It's there, but until we're in relationship, God doesn't appear. So I want to tell a story as we talk about these things. I'm offering a constellation of things, and you can see if and how they connect. I won't bother to connect them. We'll just let them be. And so here's a story of a young man, Tetsugen. Now, Tetsugen was a monk in Japan in the 1600s. And Tetsugen's call, his destiny, his dream was at a very young age, he wanted to translate the talks of Buddha into Japanese. They had never been in Japanese before. And so he started working to learn how to do this, and he was very committed to it. And then he enlisted an artist friend of his. He says, while I'm doing this, what if you illustrated them with your beautiful woodblock carvings, and we could print those? So they both very excitedly began to work on this, and then they begged alms along the way to have enough money to publish this beautiful holy text. Well, they worked on this for about 8-9 years, and then there was a flood like Katrina or Irma or Harvey in the northwest part of Japan where Tetsugen grew up. So he gave all the money away to help people where he grew up. And they went back, they continued to translate and do the woodblock carvings and go back out on the road and beg alms to publish this amazing text. And about 9, 10, 11 years later, there was an earthquake in another part of Japan. And Tetsugen said, well, they're not the people I grew up with, but what's the difference? And he said, I'm going to have to give all the money away. And he said, damn it. I think that was the original Japanese. Damn it. And he continued again, and after 25 years, Tetsugen published the original translation of Buddha's talks in Japanese for the very first time with his friend's woodblocks. And today, one of those original copies is in a museum in Kyoto, under glass, and the plaque under it reads, in his lifetime, Tetsugen published 3 versions of the holy text. Only one is visible. Only one is visible. Love helps us see. Love cures blindness. Love made Tetsugen understand that just because he didn't grow up with those people, they were also part of his community. And what he didn't realize was that his call was to translate the talks of Buddha by embodying Buddha's talks, not by writing the words in another language. We wouldn't know this story if not for his love and his care. It also tells us that our gifts, our greatness, resides in working with what we're given more than what we want. And he was blessed to be able to do both. He finally did. There's nothing wrong with working for what we want. But I've come to understand, the longer that I'm blessed to be here, that working for what we want is an apprenticeship for working with what we're given. It's a training ground for our love, so that when things show up, then our greatness of heart will really appear. So I want to move to a more modern story. about this. And this is, and I'm going to refer to some notes here because this is part of something new that I'm writing, working on. And I was recently, and this goes, it does involve that Hurricane Irma that went through Florida. We'll see if I need the notes. But I was reading Neil deGrasse Tyson. We've heard, the amazing physicist today, contemporary physicist, remarkable man. And he has a little book that's called Astrophysics for People in a Hurry. It's a little, and it's not watered down. I mean, it's really a challenge if you don't know physics, which I don't. But it's worth it because of his lens and his perception. So I was astonished to learn from him by what a thin, narrow margin life is here at all. And he traces back in the very beginning of time when the universe was forming, that there was actually a period of time where matter and antimatter were eating each other, and that actually the antimatter was known as hadrons, and the matter, the positive growth matter, was known as photons. But which I hadn't run across hadron until I read this. But what he said was that only when there were 1,000,000,001 photons to cancel out the billion hadrons, there was one photon. And because there was one more photon than hadron, we have this. If it had been the other way, none of us or none of this, the sun, the earth, the solar system wouldn't be here. It's remarkable. And he said if the earth settling into its orbit, had been a little closer to the sun, all the oceans would have evaporated and there'd be no life on earth. If the earth had settled a little farther away in its orbit, they would have frozen and there would have still been no life on earth. And so what was powerful to me as I reflected and meditated on this was that this isn't a description of what happened. This is a description of what is always happening. This, in fact, explains the purpose of goodness. Because life continues only because there's one more gesture of love than fear. One more photon than hadron. Because there's one more kindness than cruelty. And every day, we don't know if life is going to continue until we're loving and kind. So this isn't a description of history. This is a description of how life continues. And part of our job, I believe that life has been made just hard enough that we need each other to ensure the journey of love. And every day, it is our responsibility to be the one more photon, to be the one more gesture of love, of kindness, of understanding that will keep life living, that will keep the universe unfolding. So an example of this happened actually during this hurricane that flooded Puerto Rico and the Caribbean and Irma and the other hurricane. I can't escaping my name right now. But so within the space of 24 hours, we had an example of both a human photon and a human hadron. In St. Martin, as that terrible hurricane was devastating the Caribbean, Marriott Hotels sent a cruise ship to rescue their guests from St. Martin. There were 1,800 available seats on this cruise ship, and they left people who weren't their guests stranded on the island, even though there was plenty of room. There's your hadron. There's your cruelty. There's your absence of heart. There's your moment of blindness. Within 24 hours, Delta Flight 431 left from LaGuardia to Puerto Rico to save as many people as they could. They got in, just landed in Puerto Rico, and as the plane refueled, they let on anyone and everyone who could get on that plane. And they had literally 20 minutes. They were in the eye of the hurricane, and that plane, with the help and assistance of air traffic control people both in America and down in Puerto Rico and Florida, made it through the eye of that hurricane, and while it was spinning around them, and were able to get out and saved 450 people. And there's your photon. It's happening every day. Because we are in a living universe where every act of heart matters. Because we don't know. We don't know if when you help someone who falls in that parking lot, if that's the photon that will keep life on earth going. What an amazing thing and responsibility for us to have. And what else would we do? What else would we do? What a blessing. A small poem of mine that I shared with folks this weekend. Again, it speaks to how inextricably linked we are. It goes like this: the mystery is that whoever shows up when we dare to give has exactly what we need hidden in their trouble. The mystery is that whoever shows up when we dare to give has exactly what we need hidden in their trouble. How often I go to help someone with full heart and good intention, only to trip and realize that they were there to help me. Because I believe that those who wake are the students, and those who stay awake are the teachers, and oh, how we take turns. Oh, how we take turns. So I want to bring a couple of other voices in here, quotes from contemporary people. Robert Enright, a forgiveness researcher at the University of Wisconsin, he says, "We must prepare the hearts of the children for the conflicts they will inherit." We must prepare the hearts of the children for the conflicts they will inherit. And that means we tell children the truth. We help them understand that life depends on the one gesture of kindness. We help them understand that we will be blind and sighted. And when I'm blind, you can help me when you're sighted, and then I can help you. In Chinese mythology, there is a great mythic bird called the Chien, C-H-I-E-N. And the Chien has one wing and one eye. And its sole purpose in life is to find another Chien so it can see and fly. That holds what's the essence of community and relationship. Vincent Harding, who's now gone, was a contemporary of Martin Luther King Jr., one of the freedom fighters in the 60s. And he asked this very powerful and obvious question, but how do we prepare ourselves inwardly to participate in the oneness of humanity? How do we do that? How do we prepare ourselves inwardly? You have these beautiful affirmations, and then our work is to go out of here and say, well, how do I do that? What's the step I can take? What's the step of kindness? How can I restore sight in myself and others? How can I open the heart when it's closed so that I can participate in the oneness of humanity and keep the living universe going? Cynthia Cherry, she was the president of Tulane University. I had a chance to meet her, wonderful woman, and she said, if another world is possible, what is our role in making it happen? And I think we talked about this weekend. I feel very deeply, we're not here to fix the world, we're here to inhabit it. And if we inhabit it with the kind of love that you've been expressing here, that we're talking about, it'll fix itself. So I want to talk a little bit about two concepts that actually have traditions, they're rituals, that have a lot to do with how we participate in the oneness of humanity, about how we keep things together, how we repair relationship and community. And both have to do our rituals and customs around water, mostly water. So the one is the notion of the commons. Now, the ancient notion of commons refers to land that no one owns but everyone needs. And so it's not my land or your land, but we have to take care of it. So this raises the idea of the stewardship of the commons. And I want to talk about it for a minute literally, and also the commons we're talking about is also the common good, is the oneness of humanity, is the living universe, you know. So a simple example of this is we all live on a lake, and we rely on the water, but no one owns the lake. So we have to care for it, even though no one owns it. In Mongolia, ancient herders and shepherds, the plains, the grasslands are just, thousands of acres. They're vast. And all along the edges are these homesteads where shepherds and farmers have their flocks, and they all share and graze and have their livestock live off the commons, the common grasslands. No one owns it. It's too big to own. But they all have to agree to take care of it because all of their homes depend on it. Lobster fishermen in Maine, they drop their buoys, their traps, they know where to go back, they have their little markers, but no one owns the deep. But they all have this common interest and commitment and covenant to care for what is larger than them that they all depend on. And you can see where this is going, because spirit is a commons. We all depend on it, like the water, like the grasslands, like the ocean, and nobody owns it. And we all have to keep it clear and pure and clean and moving, because we all depend on it. Air is another commons. Right here, we're all breathing this air. It's going out of your lungs into my lungs and back, so what was my air is now your. Whose air is it? Okay, forget about that, right? It's our air. And the same thing with the heart. I have feelings, you have feelings, you hear me, you feel me, I feel you. Whose feelings are they? They're our feelings. So the depth of heart that we all depend on is a commons. How do we participate in the oneness of humanity? We have to commit to a good stewardship of the commons, of these resources. So now, how do we do? Let's go to another water ritual, which is a great lesson in how do we do this. So this is an acequia. Anybody ever hear of a acequia? Sequia. It actually began, the custom began in the Middle East, but it's also in the Native Americans in the Southwest. And the sequia is a riverbed or a stream bed that usually comes from when the mountains thaw, the snow, it travels down and is the water source for a village. In fact, villages would often settle around the mouth of an acequia. So what happens is during the winter and during the rest of the year, the acequia gets filled with debris. Trees fall in it. Mud gets stuck. Snake nests, bird nests, all kinds of things. So once a year, in the indigenous traditions, both in the Middle East and in the Southwest with Native Americans, the entire community takes 2 or 3 days. They have a sacred ritual, and everyone clears out the acequia so that the source water can reach the village and give them life. So how do we participate in the oneness of humanity? Well, these traditions point a way. We have to clear the acequia. We have to commit to clear the debris that gathers between the source and our community. Whether that's wounds, prejudice, bias, memory, stubbornness. We have to agree together to clean the acequia so that the source of spirit can flow again clearly into our communities. How do we do that? I don't know, but I'm committed to learning. How? I think that's the challenge of our age. How do we clean the acequia? So I want to move to one more topic and share a set of stories here in our time together this morning. And this also has to do with how. And these stories are they're inspirational to me. They're heroes I didn't really know about. And I wonder why I didn't know about them. I wonder why their stories weren't taught in school. And they all focus on this incredible, important notion that we are more than what is done to us. We are not slaves to patterns. Patterns are powerful, but we are more than what is done to us. So the first story has to do with a medieval king in Korea, Sejong. Sejong, and I have a chapter about him in this book. So I discovered that Sejong, this is quite incredible, 1300s, 1400s, his father, Traejong, so apparently the Jong part was their last name, Traejong was ruthless. I mean, he was like, Attila the Hun or Genghis Khan. He was so ruthless that upon being made king after the celebration and coronation, he had all of his siblings and his wife's siblings killed so that no one could threaten his power. My God. So he had 3 sons. Sejong was the youngest. So the first unusual thing here that we are more than what is done to us is that, typically in history, monarchies, the eldest son is in line to become king. Well, the 2 older brothers went to their father and said, there's something special about little Sejong, and we're going to step aside. We think you should make him king. Whoever heard of such a thing? What made these 2 sons of the king step aside? We're more than our patterns. We're more than what we're told to be. And the second thing that's remarkable is that the father said, okay. This ruthless guy who killed all of his relatives, and he kind of went into semi-retirement, so he didn't want to give up all his power. But he said, okay, little Sejong, you run things. So that's what made him open his heart, go from the blindness of cruelty to the sightedness of love. And then the most amazing thing is, of course, that Sejong had no model for how he was to rule, and was an enlightened king. So the first thing he did was he called together a hall of worthies, he called it, where he got the best minds and hearts of his time in the country together. And he said, your job is I will give you tasks so that you will use your gifts to serve our people. And it was an agrarian culture, so the first thing he did, he said, and an illiterate culture, so the first thing he did was said, I want you to gather our farmers' wisdom so they don't have to reinvent everything every season. And basically they created the first Farmer's Almanac. But the real reason we tell this story is because in 1446, so this was an illiterate culture, purposely kept illiterate because knowledge is power. They used an ancient form of Chinese specifically because it was complicated and the masses couldn't learn it. So Sejong said, "It saddens me that my people can't express their concerns." That's what he said. And he charged his Hall of Worthies, "I want you to create a phonetic language that anyone can learn in 2 weeks." And they did. And he gave it as a gift to the Korean people, October 9th, 1446. And it is the current language that Korea uses, Hangul. And October 9th Sejong is celebrated still to this day. We're more than what is done to us. Remarkable. Why isn't this story told? Why aren't we given this example of light coming out in the face of blindness, of love coming out in the face of cruelty? Wow. Second story we've come up in more modern times to the Holocaust. And it involves a dear friend of mine who was a child of the Holocaust, who's now gone. He died at 102, Joel Elkes. And this is about his father, Elkanon Elkes, who was a doctor. And the Kovno Ghetto in Kovno, Lithuania, was kind of a Renaissance culture in Eastern Europe. And it was forced into a ghetto by the Nazis. And as they did, they said, "We're only going to deal with, the SS will only deal with one of you. Pick one of you for us." And it turned out that after 2.5 years, that ghetto was liquidated and people were trained to Auschwitz. And when he knew this, when Elkanon Elkes knew this, they did everything they could to try to save people. They actually took young children and babies and put them in potato sacks and threw them over the wall, hoping that someone would save them. And at the same time, because there were many skilled musicians in the ghetto, at the same time that they were preparing for this inevitable trip to Auschwitz and no way out, he charged the musicians of the Kovno Ghetto to prepare a concert in which they would play Beethoven's Ode to Joy. And they played Ode to Joy in the middle of the ghetto as the preparing for the days ahead when the trains would take them to Auschwitz. What amazing spirit, what amazing lighted and sightedness of heart in the face of blindness and cruelty. And Aaron Barak, who went on to become the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Israel, one of the only people in modern times to hold both the rights of Palestinians and Jews in equal measure, was one of those babies thrown in a potato sack over that wall. The one photon that keeps the universe living. The one gesture. So I would say to you that the highest ethic of all really is not shared values, but our shared humanity. Our shared humanity. And I'll tell you one more story and close with a short poem. So Joel's mother, Miriam Elkes, she survived Auschwitz and spent her last years in Israel. And as happens with many Holocaust survivors, she really didn't talk about it until the end of her life, and then all of a sudden she talked to Joel as if they had talked about it. And she just broke into this conversation as if they had talked about it for years. And she said, there were two things that helped me survive those terrible times. She said, every day that I woke up in that camp, I carried on my person a broken crust of bread, in case during the day I came in contact with someone more in need than me. And she said she had a broken piece of comb that every night she combed her hair, not to look pretty, but to affirm her person. These stories are modern myths. They help us find our way to keep the universe living. And so I leave this with you. What is it that you carry every day in case you meet someone more in need than you? And what small gesture do you do at the close of every day to affirm your person? To make sure that you are a healthy cell in the universal body? And I ask you to ask those questions of other people, because it matters. So I leave you with another small poem of mine called Free Fall. If you have 1 hour of air and many hours to go, you must breathe slowly. If you have 1 arm's length and many things to care for, you must give freely. If you have 1 chance to know God and many doubts, you must set your heart on fire. We are blessed. Each day is a chance. We have 2 arms. Fear wastes air. You feel this in our silence? That's the sound of the universe continuing to live. Thank you for letting me be a part of your wonderful community. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Fantastic, right?
There's a new church on the horizon, made of light, not of stone, calling out to all creation, you are not alone. Lions and lambs, saints and sinners, best of friends, enemies, woman and man, losers and winners, they're all in you and me. We are one heart, looking for answers. We are one soul, finding our way through the dark. One dream we share together. We are all a part of one heart. Out in the cold, there are faces hidden by the wind and the rain. Hold out your hand, someone will take it and bring you home again. We are one heart, looking for answers. We are one soul, finding our way through the dark. One dream we share together. We are all a part of one heart. Around the world today, all fires are burning, tears are falling from the sky, and still the world keeps turning. We are one heart, one soul, remember we are all a part. Yes, we are all a part. Oh, we are all a part of one heart. One one heart that keeps on beating through a kind act of kindness, through the eyes I've been given to see.